of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl Hentz here, and I'm very pleased to welcome back to tonight's show someone who was a very regular guest for a lot of years, and this is his first time back since we've been back, City Manager Mark Rohloff.
Oh, happy to be here, Cheryl.
I'm happy to have you. Welcome back.
Always fun.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, you know, I put out the word to you that I wanted to talk to you, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, and you said, let's wait until the budget gets kind of fleshed out a little.
Yeah.
So here you are. So we're going to talk about the budget, and you can tell us all what kind of good news you have for us taxpayers at this time of year.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
So let's start with that. You know, I know that you guys had meetings in July, or a meeting in July. You had one in August, then you had another one in September. That I think, from looking at the various website stuff, I think that's probably the last actual budget hearing that you guys had.
Yeah, the council changed a couple years ago. They wanted to have budget workshops before the budget was submitted to them, so they had a good grounding on where we were as we were before the budget, because I think they were concerned that they were getting some surprises that they weren't necessarily expecting when the budget was delivered to them. And I think there's some impression sometimes that the budget is this secret document. It has to be brought out and unveiled at one time, but it really doesn't. To have it come out in bits and pieces so people are prepared for what it means, I think that's important. And council impressed upon staff that the better information we have earlier, the better they can make good decisions, and sometimes really tough decisions as well. So those budget workshops were intended to do that. The budget itself was unveiled about a week ago, and the council is now reading it and absorbing it and trying to figure out how they want to make any changes to it. And I'm not worried about changes to the budget. That is entirely council's role and responsibility. Some folks get a little nervous when the council wants to change the staff's budget. I don't worry about that. It really is their document. Especially when you hear the numbers, they aren't the greatest. Because of two major factors, debt service related to all our street improvements, as well as health insurance costs for city employees. That's going up 12% next year.
Wow. So
those two numbers each account for about $1 million increase individually, and we're looking at right now we're looking at a potential tax increase of about 4.5% on the city's portion of the bill. Now, of course, there's other elements to your tax bill.
Right.
School district has theirs.
School district.
That's going to be a good size too. State.
And the technical college.
And the county.
Yeah,
so all
county.
those entities. Yeah. Now, I know the counties isn't going up very much, if at all, but our number and the school number is going up. I can only speak to the city's number, but it's proposed at 4.5%. That's the highest increase it's been since I've been here in 6 years, and I know council's very concerned about that. So they're going to be looking at options, and I've got a series of options that they can consider to get that number down. And so that'll really be the crux of the new workshops now. But we had told them 12% on the health insurance. We talked a lot about debt service because we've been doing a lot of streets. You talk to some people, it's like we're not doing enough. Other people, they don't want to have to pay for that additional cost. So it's a balancing act. Which which decisions are you going to make to get that all worked out?
Yeah, well, I've got so many different questions about some of the things that you just said. But boy, see, now, I haven't had you here in like, I don't know, since we were off for a year. It's probably been close to 2 years that you've been here. And now look what you do to me. You'd say, hey, Cheryl, your taxes on the city side, Merry Christmas to you and Happy New Year. Your taxes are going up 4.5%.
If you kept a better eye on me and had the show last year, you would have stopped me, I guess.
Instead of eye on Oshkosh, we'll say eye on Mark Rohloff.
Yes. But it's true. I mean, that's a big number. And I'm not going to tell anybody that that's a number that is necessarily acceptable. But in the realities of where we are right now, on the revenue side, we're continuing to get reductions from the state, or if anything, no increase. And a lot of people think that sales taxes go to the city. Sales taxes go to the city through the state, through the shared revenue program.
And they've been cutting shared revenue all along for 12 years.
And you could make an argument maybe over the last, back in 08, 09, when the state was getting actual revenue reductions, that when you're sharing the good, you got to share the bad. Well, the bad was being shared, and you could argue that that was acceptable. But now that things are turning around, we're not seeing the sharing coming back as things are improving, and we still, even with Act 10, we still have collective bargaining with our public safety unions and our transit unions. So almost half of our employees are still covered by collective bargaining. So that's not the same as a lot of other entities that none of their employees or very few of their employees have that. So we've got that hanging over our heads. So anyway, I can go on, but go ahead.
Yeah, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the budget, Mark, but you know, let me just say this. I know that you guys work very hard to have a fairly lean budget. And I also know that things continue to go up. Insurance, you know, that's about $1 million jump right there.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other $1 million jump that you talked about. You know, the cost of gasoline keeps going up. Everything continues to go up. But what's not going up at a reasonable rate, much less with the cost of living or whatever else, is everybody's wages. And at some point, there's going to be such a disparity between the costs that keep rising and the puny increase in salary and wages that people are getting, that you're going to reach a breaking point. So what happens then?
I think the thing we need to focus on to resolve that basic issue, because that disparity does exist. If I'm giving you a 4.5% increase in your taxes and your wages only go up 1%, it's going to pinch you as an individual, just like it's pinching us at the city. I really believe that the answer lies in economic development, and we need to take a look at increasing quality paying jobs. Retail jobs are well and good. People love to see different retail stores in the community, but retail stores are really just more the back end of the economic development.
They don't pay a living
train.
wage.
No, not at all. And we need to, even with cutbacks at Oshkosh Corporation, we need to diversify our economy. We're working on getting an aviation business park and targeting aviation industries, because when we're talking about living wages, and I think we do need to talk about that, and if we're talking about how we are going to support an economic development standpoint, there are projects like the hotel that don't pay the great wages, and we know that, but they redevelop an area, and that's why we do that. If we're going to put any area of emphasis, it's going to have to be in getting living wage jobs, minimum $17 an hour that we're talking about, that will help rise people's wages. Our average wage is about $17 an hour. So we need to do better than 17 if we're going to raise ourselves. That's how people are going to be able to afford it. And what they do with that money, they can pay taxes, but they can also create other jobs in the community, create opportunities for everybody, create second jobs for a second family member to get a job. Not that you have to work 2 jobs, but another family member who, if there's only one person working at home, if a second person can work, or if you can get your kid to work to offset that. But it's got to work all together. Aviation, we think, is one of those areas that we can really target on. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about economic development later.
Yeah.
So, but that is really what we have to do to get that up, because we can't sustain 4.5% increases in taxes and only 1% increase in wages. It just
Right.
it's never going to. We know where that'll end. That'll end in a very bad situation.
Yeah, the restaurant and the retail jobs, those are great for college students who are looking for something part-time to help subsidize, their tuition or their drinking.
Whatever vices
they want
have.
to do.
That's it.
Or for a high school kid who is getting their first job. That's what those things are good for. And, I did that when I was still in high school. I got a job working in a restaurant, and, it was good in that it gave me some extra money. I was actually able to pay cash for my first car. Granted, it wasn't a brand new car, it was a used car, but it gave me a great feeling to go down to the dealership and plunk cash down for a car. Now, that's the only time I've been able to do that. No, I take that back, one other time. But that doesn't happen very often for too many of us.
No.
But, it built that work ethic that so many people need to learn at an early age. But it does not, like we just talked about, provide a living wage at all. I mean, you can't support, if you're working and supporting yourself, you can't support yourself on that wage, much less a family. So
a lot of folks may not know that, as a result of a lot of the cutbacks at Oshkosh Corporation, the Department of Defense has a little division called the Office of Economic Assistance, and they know that when they make cutbacks in federal funding, that it has a big ripple effect throughout the economy. And we've been given some grants from the Department of Defense. Part of it is to take a look at the aviation cluster and seeing what we can do, but those are some of the things that we want to really target. We're real happy that another one is technology in terms of information systems. A company called Dealer Fire, which is right here in downtown Oshkosh, has been increasing employment for a lot of folks. A lot of them are kids in the IT sector just coming out of school and getting jobs and being able to stay in Oshkosh, which is another thing. We want to make sure that we're replenishing folks that, like us, who are getting old, that we want to replenish new people into the workforce and doing that as well. And they're paying very good wages for these young professionals coming out. Those are the targets that we got to do. We're not going to be Silicon Valley or anything like that, but can we develop an IT sector with places like Dealer Fire or Impromed, which does software for the veterinarian industry? Those are jobs that will pay better and will keep young people in our community, and we need that as well, because the young people will go out. We go to bed at 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday night.
Well,
the young folks, speak for yourself, huh? But the younger folks, I mean, they are the ones who populate our downtown businesses. And I may do the business lunch, but I'm not going to be doing the late night stuff. But that business is open for 12 hours, and we need the younger people to frequent those establishments when they want to, and I'll frequent it when I want to.
Sure.
But that's what we need for our whole economy to move forward. So getting young people to stay in Oshkosh and giving them jobs that they can use, that's a real big impact that we can get if we can attract these better type of jobs.
Sure. Well, let's kind of start paring down this budget for 2015 and see where the problem areas might be or what have you. Are you looking at anything in the way of personnel or core service cutbacks?
Well, one of the things that is in the budget, a few years ago, we had done a new pay plan for employees. A lot of employees' positions have been regraded, and we're hiring at lower wages than we had previously. We're using more broad market-based wages, not just public employees, but we're taking a look at private sector comparables. Now, you're not going to get comparables everywhere like police and fire. That's only a public sector job. But other positions, we're starting at a lower wage. But the council also added a pay per performance component, which was it was met with mixed reviews, to be honest with you, but we've been working through it. We're going to be postponing funding that program for 2015. At least that's the way I propose it. Not every council member is thrilled about that because they committed to funding this program, or at least committed to it philosophically, that they want to reward employees for doing extraordinary work, outstanding work. But with our situation the way it is, we really need to take a look at across-the-board wage increases to make sure that we're keeping up with our market, because we don't want to lose employees to other communities. So the pay for performance program is going to be suspended in its current form in the budget. Now, council may change it, but that'll be up to them. So that's one cut. We've made some significant cuts in capital outlay, equipment replacement, vehicles, putting them off a year. Now that catches up with you after a while, but sometimes you have to look at it and say, can we get another year out of this? And if we can, we're going to do that. I have not made any recommendations for personnel cuts in this budget. We made a lot of cuts last year, and some of the cuts that I had suggested to the council said no to some of them. So I've got them on a list of possible options so the council can look at those. And those are areas, public works, that's engineering, doing some of the design of street projects that we need done. Planning, with planners who have been doing a lot with neighborhood revitalization, which I know council feels very strongly about. Other areas, information technology, support, internal support. We have to bite the bullet internally. If we have to cut services on the outside, we have to take a look at services on the inside. Potentially eliminating a transit route, the one that runs between here and Neenah. It doesn't get a lot of usage, so we have to ask ourselves, is that something we really want to continue? Those are the examples of things that the council is going to wrestle with, because 75% of our budget's personnel. In police and fire, it's 95%.
Wow.
So if you're talking about expenditure cuts, you got to talk about personnel cuts, and if you talk about personnel, you're going to talk about services. So those are the bullets that you got to bite down on, and that's why council, I think, is going to have to take a strong look at those. But they recognize tax increase, service reductions. It's going to be one of those two things.
You know, when you talk about, at least when I talk about core services, core services in the city, I think of police, I think of fire, I think of garbage collection, I think of streets being maintained, that kind of thing. And I know that there's a whole other area that is important, you know, for quality of life issues, you know, the parks and this, that, and the other. But I have to say, and I don't know how much money came from actual city funds for the most recent zoo expansion, or for some of the new, I think there's some new wolves there or something. Did any money come from city coffers for that, or was that all privately raised?
I would say most of that was actually privately raised. The the Zoological Society does a great job at fundraising, and they've got some very dedicated supporters. Herrenberg Foundation has done a lot towards that, and they've used those funds to generate more funds. So like in the case of the wolves, I believe those were entirely purchased by the Zoological Society.
And then who pays to maintain, you know, not just the zoo overall, but who pays for veterinary care if any of the animals there, be it the wolves or anything else, need care?
There is, you can take a look at every page of the budget, and the Zoological Society is one of those. It's a revenue fund, but it doesn't entirely, it's not entirely covered by fees. The Herrenberg Fund actually allows for free admission to the zoo, which is great, but there's other costs that are associated with it. And that's tax dollars. There's not any other resource available.
Yeah.
So that does come from tax dollars.
Yeah, and see, I mean, I'm kind of opposed to most zoos just as an animal rights advocate. But, you know, it just seems like we keep putting more and more stuff into that park. And, you know, the zoo, I'm sure, provides some kind of educational benefit for the kids, maybe for some adults too. But I don't like having to pay for things like that out of our tax dollars when we're talking about other things that possibly could get cut or at least affected because of the ever-increasing costs for some of this stuff.
You know, you bring up a very valid point. The real struggle we have with is when we do these capital improvements like at the zoo, we generally try to get the capital improvements funded by outside sources. And when the operating costs aren't necessarily going to increase with those because the new wolves are actually replacing wolves that died. And so that's not necessarily increasing it, but it's maintaining that obligation. And that's where you get into that dilemma of what are things that are the basic services, police, fire, snow plowing. I think everybody has a pretty general agreement on what are those basic services. But when we're talking about attracting businesses to the community and what makes Oshkosh special, it's typically those things. The dilemma you have is somebody likes the golf course, but somebody else doesn't like the zoo, and you have those competing interests. And eventually council is going to have to evaluate those and say, what are the highest priorities, and do we say we're not going to do without these? And we've had a history of having some great benefactors. When you think about the museum, which is celebrating its 90th anniversary.
Yes.
We got this great donation from the Sawyers family years ago. Do you do without the museum, or do you say we're going to continue to do it? We have to challenge all those groups to do as much fundraising as possible. But at the end of the day, the museum still gets a pretty substantial subsidy, and that's the public debate that needs to take place, because we have a $30 million tax bill that we send out to everybody, and you and I pay that bill.
Yeah.
Most of it goes for the basics, police, fire, but museums probably about $800,000. The library is only I want to make sure I get the number right, but it's only a few $100,000.
It's a fraction of the budget.
Yeah, it's a fraction of the budget. Yeah. And you take a look at the library, the surveys that we get rate the library not just great in terms of service, which everybody knows. We have a great library.
We do.
But in terms of importance, our residents rate our library as a very important service. And you would think, well, that's just quality of life. Well, to the residents, it's a very essential quality of life thing.
Well, and attracting new business and new employees here. That too is that's why quality of life and arts and things like that are so important. And I'm a proponent of those. I just don't know that seeing wolves or some of these other animals in the zoo is one of those quality of life issues. The park, yes, but it's a beautiful park. And I hate that stockade fencing that is around where the animals are. It looks like a fortress. But I'm sure you've heard that before. Okay, so what else? What else about the budget is going to shock people or disappoint people?
I really think we've gotten it boiled down to the tax increase as a result of those two things. The only big fee increase we're really looking at, and I say big meaning you're gonna notice it. Stormwater continues to be a big priority, and that's the one fee increase you're going to see. We're not proposing any real new increases in fees or anything. We did a lot of those last year when you weren't doing your show and not watching us, Cheryl. So I
was still kind of watching you.
Yeah, but they were there, and we did a lot last year, and we're not proposing those this year. There's only so many times you can go to certain wells before that well runs dry. We try to keep pace with whatever the market is, what other communities do. So we're not proposing any major increases to do that next year.
Now, you mentioned stormwater, that there was going to be an increase for that. You mean on the tax bill?
No, that's the one.
That's the one we saw on our water bills.
On your water bill, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, boy, I was shocked with that one. I looked at that and I said, hey, we haven't used any more water than we typically do, and our bill's gone up almost $50 a quarter. What in the hell is going on here?
Well, some of it was water, though, and I know you're going to come after me for that one.
Well,
too.
I did call City Hall and I said, why has this? Because I talked to other people too, and they said, what's going on with the water bills? And and honestly, Mark, we did not use more than we normally do. Maybe an extra load of laundry here, or maybe watering the garden just ever so slightly more, but nothing that would have warranted that kind of a jump. So I did call City Hall, and they said it was for, when you're doing road construction, you're replacing a lot of the old stormwater system. And of course, I know that that's important, because that's one of the reasons we got into that big problem with that major flood that we had, about 6 years ago, 5 years ago?
6 years.
Is it 6 years? I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
it was, yep, but I wasn't sure. Because well, you tell it.
Yeah.
You tell why it flooded. Because
Well-
the pipes aren't big enough, they're too old, and they're not round enough, they're not wide enough to carry that flow of water, right?
And we've as we've developed, if we don't have a way to hold back water, and we create more impervious surface, it's going to run faster through those pipes. The pipes are going to fill up faster. So that's one issue. As we've grown, as you grow at the outer edges, the pipes at the end need to be bigger to accommodate the more volume of water coming through. So you have to do a couple things. You got to hold back the water for a while, or you have to increase the size of the pipes. In reality, we need to do both. We also have to clean that water now. We are under requirements from the feds, the federal government, and the state government to clean our storm water, to make it to take the particulates out. So that's why you haven't asked me yet, why do the street sweepers come by so much? The reason we send the street sweepers through is because that's one of the ways we can demonstrate how we're getting particulates out of stormwater. But we've got to take care of flooding, which is a much more real issue for Oshkosh. And last year our City Hall parking lot was torn up, and we put a big tank in there, a big underground storage tank, and that was to take care of what we now call the Middle Village area, immediately north of City Hall, and we just put pipes in there this year. So we get big pipes in the Middle Village area that empty into this underground pond, and then it slowly releases it out to the river. So it gets the water out of those neighborhoods a lot quicker. And there was flooding in that neighborhood. We have 120 separate, distinct watersheds throughout the city that we have to address. Our biggest one's Sawyer Creek, and we have ones that are as small as a quarter of an acre, very small. But they all converge in the Fox River, Lake Winnebago, Lake Butamore. So we've got to accommodate those things. So our stormwater rates went up. Our water rates also went up. A lot of that is replacing water pipes that are probably 70, 80 years old. Generally, water pipes will last you about 50 years. Sewer will last you about 75 years. We have sanitary sewer pipes and storm sewer pipes that date back to the 1880s, 125 years old. So they're 50 years past their useful life. And we've got some serious problems that we need to address. So as we are evaluating these, if we're doing a street, we're taking a look, because we don't want to have to dig up the street twice. And if we see that, if we inspect the sanitary and the storm sewers, we'll replace them. Water, you don't necessarily know until you dig it up. There's no real true way. So you do it based on age.
Sure.
So we're timing these, because we don't want to do a water pipe at 40 years old. It would be wasteful.
Right.
But we're doing 50, 60, 70 years. We're replacing water mains from the 1930s. That's a little on the high side. Not real bad, but sanitary sewer, 125 years old in the neighborhoods just north of City Hall, which means their original pipes were never replaced. And we have to replace those, and that costs money. We borrow for it. Our debt service is going up, and that's why the increases in the rates.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little funny story here just real quickly about just north of City Hall. You know that I sold it last year, but for years I owned a rental property just north of here.
Yeah.
And I had many, many years ago a storm sewer collapse just before it hooked up to the city's main line. So of course that was on me, nearly $6,000 worth.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so then when they redid, well, I had the pleasure, since I had a corner lot, they redid both my streets.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So when they did Irving Street, though, all of a sudden on my tax bill, I see that they charged me for some of these things that I already paid for. And I called down here and I said, you gotta fix this. And so they went back in the records and they said, oh yeah, we see where you pulled a permit for that, and that was done, and that was done. So that helped. So, people need to, I'm not saying you guys purposely screw up, but everybody makes mistakes. So that was just kind of a funny thing that if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have been paying for that twice, basically.
That's a very good point, because there are a lot of people, they'll come to the council meeting and hoping that the council will fix this. If the council sees something like that, they're going to refer it to staff. So if you see something that you think that maybe you already paid for it once, maybe we billed you for it once already, when we're doing a street project, call our Public Works Department. They will sit down with you and go through it. We have a guaranteed life of public improvements, and our concrete streets are guaranteed for 25 years. So if we're replacing your street less than 25 years, there should be a credit for whatever remaining life is left in that. And it's right in our code. You're entitled to it. And yes, we're not perfect. And if we miss something, please let us know. It's not intentional. We want to make sure that we're fixing those things.
Yeah. Oh, and the staff was great. They just said, well, did you pull a permit for that? So that they could go back and look. And of course, my plumber did. So all was well. And they made the adjustments that they needed to make. They couldn't. It's a long story. They couldn't do it on that tax bill because that tax bill was already generated.
Right.
But they worked it out, and I didn't overpay for anything. And I have to say, the staff was wonderful to work with. And I don't know if that was under your tenure or Dick Walling's when he was still city manager. Might have been right there, kind of at the changing of the guard. But they were wonderful, and so I've got nothing but praise for city staff.
Good.
Let's talk about, since we're on the subject of capital improvements, let's talk about capital improvements. First and foremost, what in the world is going in it's set back from the frontage road, but it's kind of over in the old Culvers, well, not the old Culvers area, but the Culvers area, sort of in the old Fleet Farm area, sort of set way back off the frontage road.
Behind the old Menards, you mean? Or where
Yeah.
Best Buy is?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
That's huge.
It is huge.
What is that?
That is a stormwater project.
I had a feeling.
We're calling it the Armory Detention Basin because
Okay.
we purchased a portion of the land from the National Guard Armory. We actually purchased it from another portion from the folks that purchased the old Menards store, and we got some land behind there. That is what's called Campbell Creek. So
Okay.
that's probably our second largest watershed in the city. It kind of snakes its way across Highway 41 to the southwest, gets into our Southwest Industrial Park, but then upstream, or as you go, downstream closer to the river, that's the area that goes through Huntington Downs neighborhood,
Yep.
Near Franklin School, down by Lourdes Academy. Remember how bad Lourdes got hit in 2008.
I remember because
It was
my
awful.
brother lives down there, and frankly, I only live like 2 blocks away from my brother. His basement was flooded so badly, along with the rest of his neighbors, and thankfully, and knock on wood, we didn't get a thing at our house.
And that's because where you live is in a different watershed. And even as close as you are, those things can happen. How could I get flooded and you don't? And it's because of where you are in the watershed. You're not in Campbell Creek, you're in Sawyer Creek. Campbell Creek gets its way down, it gets near Lourdes Academy, and there was horrible flooding there. The idea there is once it crosses Highway 41, before it starts getting into a very highly developed area where there's a lot of impervious surface, there's not a lot of grass or anything except on your front lawn, but between your driveway and your roof and streets and in big institutions like Lourdes and the businesses along Sawyer, you've got to have a place to hold that water. And that is a sizable site. I believe that one is about 10 to 12 acres in size, and it's intended to hold the water back so that the water in the highly developed areas can get out of there as quick as possible, get it down to the river, and then it can slowly get back into the storm sewer system and over a period of 24 hours get released out, as opposed to getting it all in one big gush.
Yeah, boy, I've been kind of watching as that's been being worked on, and it is massive.
It's been inconvenient for everybody on Keller because it's been working there for a while, but the idea is they got to get the water to that area and then hold it for as long as possible.
Sure. What other types of capital improvements things are we going to be seeing? Are you still doing this on a 5-year continuum?
Yep, we
Okay.
are. And because of our borrowing issue, because of the increases, the council knows that our borrowing, we're hitting the point where people are saying, ouch, and legitimately so. So the council said we need to limit our borrowing. So in terms of general obligation borrowing, that really is streets and other public improvements like parks, museums, competing for that. We're going to be limited to $11.4 million annually for the next 10 years. We need to get our debt down, and the way we got to do is we just have to freeze it. That doesn't mean we're not doing anything. $11.4 million is still a lot of money, but it's not. I mean, it's not going to be 15 and 20 million that we've been borrowing the last few years. We really have to take our foot off the accelerator, and that's the analogy I've been using. A third of that will be devoted towards street improvements, and then other things that need to get done, or at parks, buildings, major equipment like a new fire truck. Those are going to have to compete for the remaining money, but we're going to see projects pared back but not eliminated. And I think in the past we said, oh, we do a lot, then we don't do any. A lot, don't do any. Here we're just going to say we're going to slow down, but just a little. And we'll get our debt capacity down. It'll equalize our tax rate over time, and that's what council really wants to do.
Sure, sure. You know, road construction and sidewalk replacement. I had the pleasure of having one of my squares, my sidewalk squares, replaced this past summer. So, and you were telling me something very interesting before we started rolling tonight. Here I was expecting that was going to show up on our tax bill this year in December, and you gave me good news. See, you're trying to offset that huge water rate increase that I got earlier this year. The good news is I don't have to pay for that sidewalk probably until my tax bill in 2015, December of 2015.
Yeah, we'll send out, when we do these sidewalk projects, we wait until the end of the process, get all the bills out, and then send it out. We want to make sure that what bill we're sending you reflects the full cost. I think there's ways we can get that out a little quicker in the future. So for you, we're taking care of this, but for other folks, I'm not so sure. But we wait until the end of the season, and the cutoff date to get them on to get the bill out to you, for you to decide, no, I want to pay this now, here's a check, or just put it on the tax bill, I'll take care of it later. The cutoff date is October 1st. So we're already past that point of no return. So even though the work in your neighborhood was done, we've got other areas of the city we haven't done. And just from a processing standpoint right now, we just wait until the contract's done. And it'll be done by, I always say before deer hunting. So that it'll all be done by then. We'll get the bills prepared, but you won't be getting that bill. You may get it next year early, but if you want to wait until the tax bill, it'll be your 2015 tax bill, not your 2014.
And if I don't want it on the tax bill, we can come into City Hall and pay it anytime before October 1st of 2015.
Yeah, there's a cutoff date that you get. If you pay it off, then you don't have to worry about it being on your tax bill.
Okay, all right. A couple other things. The new city garage, that is coming along. You know, I drive by there a lot, and so I see a little improvement, a little progress, but it's coming along, and it looks like it's going to be a nice building. When will it be finished?
I anticipate it'll be done around March 1st.
Okay.
There'll still be a few little pieces of equipment, but our goal is really to get the roof on before the snow flies. That's
Sure.
our goal.
Yeah.
Once we do that, then the internal stuff's a lot easier to do. And we had a little holdup in April and May after we finished the first phase, and we couldn't knock down the building until we got those other issues taken care of in the new part. Those were taken care of, and so originally we were going to be done around January 1st, so we lost a couple months, but we're still pretty close. So March 1st, I think we'll be able to say we're all done. Right now it's real squeezed in there because we've got to work around the contractors and everything. So we aren't taking full advantage of the space yet because we got to stay out of the way.
Sure.
And the old garage was knocked down, and so we've got the equipment in there and building equipment in there, contractors, people, but it's going very well. No big surprises budget-wise, so I think it's going to be under budget. we have some equipment.
Under budget.
It'll be under budget.
Good.
But it was a big project. I mean,
Yeah.
the budget was $19 million. So when I say under budget, I'm hoping it'll be in the 18 range. But there's other things that we saw that we really wanted to do that we decided not to do. We're going to revisit some of those and say, can we afford to get it in there and squeeze it in under budget? But we have the salt shed yet to build. Because right now we're scattered throughout the city for our salt, but all our trucks are in one place. We don't want to have people driving all over town just to pick up a load of salt. So the salt shed won't be built until 2016. That's a very unique building. You do not attach a salt shed to your main building. It's made of a creosote soaked wood, so it doesn't rust or anything.
Sure.
So that'll be off in the back 40 type of thing.
Okay. I want to talk about salt because winter is banging on our door pretty hard these days. But let's talk about the drop-off center. Once this new city garage is built, where will the drop-off center be? Is it going to be moved at all?
It's already been moved, and it'll probably be tweaked a little bit, but you're going to, instead of entering it off of Idaho, you'll now enter it off of 3rd.
Okay.
And there'll be a dedicated area for you to drop it off. It's sort of in transition now, but you can continue to drop off your waste. We started, I believe it was September 29th. So just enter off of 3rd. Don't get worried that it's closed on Idaho. Just keep going and just turn east onto 3rd Avenue, and it's right there. Same drop-off procedures as you've always been used to. That'll continue.
All right. And leaf pickup. Fall brush, if you've got some kind of brush that's coming down, what's the schedule for that right now?
Brush is the first full week of the month,
Okay.
so you got a couple weeks before you put brush out. Leaf pickup has begun. It's the day after your regular garbage day, and that it all depends on when the snow flies, because once the snow flies, we stop picking up leaves. So technically, anytime after Halloween, we could shut down leaf pickup. The reality is that our leaf pickup trucks and our snowplow trucks are one and the same. So right now we're converting our trucks that are not used for leaves, but the remainder, at a certain point, we got to take the leaf stuff off and put the plows on, and that takes a little time to do. So we're watching the weather forecast, and as long as the weather says no substantial snow's coming, we'll keep vacuuming up leaves. We like to remind people, keep them in the terrace, not in the ditch or not in the curb or in the gutter. We want them in the terrace. It's safer. It's less messy. We can get on the terrace just fine. But day after your garbage day, don't forget that.
Okay, so my garbage gets picked up on Thursdays. So my trash was picked up today. So tomorrow.
Go rake leaves when you're done tonight.
No, they're already raked, Mark.
Oh, good.
They're sitting on the terrace, right where you guys want them. So tomorrow, then they'll come by and pick them up.
Yep. And as a matter
Excellent.
of fact, we have a second shift crew. In some cases, they might be gone. We stop at 10 o'clock. But we might even be picked up that day, and if somebody's raking them out after we go, we make a quick pass through that same zone just to make sure we haven't missed anybody. So you might actually even see 2 passes in your neighborhood, depending on what's going on. We want to get the leaves picked up as much as everybody else does.
Well, and especially since I see in the next few days we're supposed to have some blustery days, those leaves would just be blown away.
Just the next week's coming.
Yeah. Are we going to see a tax increase for the new city garage, or has that already occurred and been absorbed into the budget somehow?
That's why we've got to limit our borrowing to $11.4 million, because we've got to pay for that and all the other streets we've been doing. I don't have any regrets doing the city garage. It was very inefficient, and I got to keep reminding that, because once the memories of the old garage are gone, people are going to. I've heard the term Taj Mahal already, but it was long overdue, and so you're going to see those costs. We started borrowing for that several years ago when we were working on the design. Then we borrowed a little more. In 2014, we're borrowing $6 million. Next year, in 2015, we're borrowing $4 million for the remainder of it. So that's $10 million over these 2 years. That's not getting paid for now. That's starting to get paid next year and the year after. So we've got to scale back on some of our projects, including other public facilities. I know there's a lot of folks who would like to see, Parks looks over across the street and says, Public Works got this great garage, what about us? And there's some older areas there. but you have to take a step at a time. Everybody can't get a brand new garage when one department does. We got to just slowly absorb these types of things, because you and I can only afford so much.
That's right. That's right. You mentioned parks, and we talked about parks before. I have a question. You know, this has been bandied about by City Council and the Parks Department for a while. What is happening with dogs being allowed in the parks? I know that they, you know, can go in that one park way on the west of town, but, you know, I mean, come on. It's almost 2015. You go to other cities, and dogs are, you know, those cities, those communities are extremely dog friendly. What kind of movement are we making to allow dogs in our parks, or are we not?
We had done a survey with UW-Oshkosh a couple years ago, and the results were clear as mud. And it wasn't that the survey question was bad, it was just that it was extremely divided. We have a divided community on the dog issue. You either you love them or you don't love them. I'm a lover, so don't worry, I love the dogs, but a lot of people, we get so many complaints. Even when we just, remember you said the west side, over in Sawyer, that Sawyer Creek area, we found there was a provision there that we should have been prohibiting dogs in there. We enforced it for just a week, and the pushback was incredible. That council eventually said, Parks Board, what do you think? And they said, reinstate it there. There's still a growing demand for dogs in parks. And I think it's going to have to be a continued debate. One of the things that Parks Director Ray Maurer has looked into and talked about with the Parks Board is, do we create a dog park? One of the candidates that we think might be there down the road is Quarry Park. One of the reasons for that is Quarry Park is the old landfill that got filled up, and reliability as a place, a ball field for kids or something like that, is none. There's no reliability, because it will always be settling for our lifetime, and I would say the next generation's lifetime at least. So if it's that way, what use could be used? Well, I don't think dogs care if they have to run up and down little hills, and if it changes next week. So those are the types of things we got to be creative about. Taking a look at what areas perhaps we can use a dog park. Any place I've been that has a dog park are just incredibly used. They attract people. They're a great recreation, not just for the dog, but for the dog owners, because you're walking with somebody that has something in mind.
So when you say dog park, are you talking about like Winnebago County's dog park?
Yes, just like that.
See, my problem with that, Mark, is we don't take our dogs to the dog park. And I'll tell you why. Because you never know. I mean, half the time people are just letting their dogs run, okay? And they'll come up to your dog and look like they're going to start a fight. And, you know, so you quickly pull your dogs back. That's not fun for anybody. You know, and plus, I don't know how well someone has, you know, have they vaccinated the dog properly? Have they done this? Have they cared for it properly? Or are our dogs going to be subjected to possibly getting something? Yeah. You know, whereas people who like to walk maybe just want to walk with their dog. They do it on city streets, and you don't see dog poop all over the sidewalks. So I don't think, you know, that people are going to see that in the parks. I think those people who are actually walking with their dogs are pretty responsible. It's the ones who just sort of let them run who aren't really responsible, and they're going to do that anyway. They don't care about the law.
The biggest complaint you hear is dog droppings. I mean, everybody knows that that's the, you know, we have to always look for the polite word, but that's really the issue.
I just solved that problem for you.
I think people are becoming more aware of it, and I think the debate's going to continue, but there's still a divided community, and we need to find a way. If we're going to allow dogs in parks, there's going to have to be some type of compromise, and just whether it's education, a little on the enforcement side. I mean, we don't want to be heavy-handed about it. If you take your dog to a park and it does its business, you got to take responsibility and clean up after yourself.
And I truly think most people do. I really do.
And the one or two that don't ruin it for everybody else, and we've got to just keep enforcing that. And imparting that on everybody.
Yeah. Boy, I see that we're down to like 10 minutes, so...
And you got so many things to talk about.
I know. I haven't even covered most of my list here. But let's, we've covered some of this stuff, so I can cross that off. The roundabouts, okay? There are still, we've had them now for a couple of years in some places, a full year in other places. You know, and I still see people not driving properly in them. They change lanes in the middle of the roundabout. They speed like they're at the Indy 500 through some of those roundabouts. And I have a suggestion, and I don't know what you or whoever would feel about this, but you know where some of the most polite drivers are, Mark, are in the places where they have speed enforcement and other types of enforcement via cameras. And I know that cameras, you know, sitting in these roundabouts maybe aren't all that cheap, but I'm telling you, they would pay for themselves. Just like that. Because all you have to do is just sit there, and you can watch people flying through them. You know that. When I talked to Chief Scott Groyle, he said the same thing, that people fly through them. I don't see police enforcing anything there. Once in a blue moon, I'll see a cop at a roundabout, but here you wouldn't have to have any officers, you know, and those cameras truly would pay for themselves.
Yeah, our police department, I think they primarily do their speed enforcement on stretches rather than the roundabouts themselves. Accidents happen at roundabouts. They happen on a pretty frequent basis. Mm-hmm. The severity of the accidents is way down. The amount of accidents are about the same as they were before. I think over time maybe that'll help a little bit. We've been discussing a variety of things. Some are like speed bumps to slow people down before they enter the roundabout. There's been that discussion. We've got to get people to understand that you got to be courteous to pedestrians, especially mm-hmm. Jackson and Murdoch, which is a very residential intensive neighborhood as opposed, you know, out on Witzel it's more like 41, but there are still people crossing that'll walk to Walmart or something like that, and I've just seen acts of, you know, uncaring drivers, and you got to be aware of those drivers. And you know, I've noticed, you know, you make a mistake, you want to be careful about that. Those are things that we're on the lookout for. But we've talked about putting in some. We're part of a study that was done for roundabouts because we had so many here, to take a look at what things we could put in, like flashing beacons for the crossings, or one of those areas where you can press a button and it will flash it for a pedestrian.
Kind of like you have on Oshkosh Avenue, right by, sort of by, on Congress.
Yep.
Right by Fratello's there.
Yep, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
One like at the university that needs to get moved, but the one over there.
Yeah.
Those types of things, we need to do more of those. But looking, do we put some type of speed bump, or like further east on Congress over by the Payne, where you've got some of those
mm-hmm.
raised. We need to take a look at those types of things to stop people from running into the roundabouts.
I think that's a great idea. I really do.
We're kicking around different ideas because we're on the kind of the front end of doing roundabouts. We're part of studies that we're taking a look at, and we're going to evaluate what type of improvements we may want to go on.
Okay. They're telling me we've got 5 minutes left.
Time flies.
Let's do it as quickly as we can. There's some new flashing yellow left turn signal lights at a few places in town. You know, help people understand what they're supposed to do there.
I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm not a big fan of those. And, you know, usually my job is to explain them. The DOT has seen these and believes that they provide some benefit. I find them somewhat confusing, but they're adding them. What they are is they're not that you can turn left without any. Not like a green arrow. Green arrow says you can turn, nobody approaching you is going to turn on you. Yellow means you're supposed to look for it, but that yellow arrow gets confused with a green arrow and people think they can go, and it gets a little hairy there, and it flashes and it kind of sends a mixed message. I'm one of those people who are going to have to get used to doing it, but they've been putting more in, and even though you see them in the city, generally those are put in on state highways. and you're going to see them there put in by the DOT because that seems to be all the rage. I still got to be convinced. I got sold on roundabouts. I'll back myself up on that. The yellow flashing arrows, I'm still. I guess I'm a fuddy-duddy. I'm not there yet. So
no, you're not a fuddy.
You won't necessarily see them on city-owned and operated signals, but you are going to see them on the state highways.
Okay. I don't know if we have time to even begin to get into this, but you wanted me to have you talk about Go EDC. Is that kind of an economic development thing?
Yes. What we've done in part because of a lot of input we received from the business community is they want a single place to turn to for economic development, and we've had CHAMCO and OEDC in the city, and we need an independent group that the business community can turn to, prospective businesses can turn to. So GoEDC stands for the Greater Oshkosh Economic Development Corporation, and it's a combination of governmental entities and private businesses that have put together this organization to centralize economic development, make it a one-stop shop, and to go out and do business outreach. Primary focus is on existing businesses. What can we do to help you grow, rather than going out and looking for, hunting down the big the job creators. Those are hard to get. It's growing from within ourselves and talking about what we did earlier, raising wages, because that's what we need to do to help our economy grow.
Right. Bike lanes, I just want to make a comment on this and see if there's something that you or Department of Public Works can do. We've put in a lot of bike lanes recently, and I think they're taking some getting used to for people. But what is really throwing drivers off, if they're not, if they're visiting here from out of town, or when it's raining, especially at night, I know the city tried to scrape off the old white marks.
Sawyer, you're talking about Sawyer.
I am, because that's over in my stomping grounds.
Sawyer,
it's bad, Mark.
Oh yeah, I know. That paint that was there previous was a really durable paint, and it's hard to take off. So we're going to keep working on that. But no,
painted gray then.
Yeah, it's
you can't get it off.
It's rough.
Painted gray.
No, we know that's a problem. We're hoping that after one winter it'll wear off a lot more, and we're going to have to be a little more diligent on painting the existing stuff so there's a good contrast. And right now the contrast isn't quite as high as we'd like it to be.
Yeah, it's very confusing for people. I've seen almost maybe 4 or 5 wrecks there at different times, and some of them were from out of state. But even a friend of mine was driving in the wrong. I said, no.
Yeah, I think our old paint job was too good, and that it was tough to get rid of it. And yeah, it's noticeable. Those are things we got to keep working on.
Okay. I also just want to note for people that the city has a new website, and I believe we've been putting it up throughout the show. But it's there's a 2 in there. There it is up on your screen right now. So before, it just used to be ci.oshkosh.wi.us, and now there's a 2 at the beginning. So that's kind of different. And we didn't get to the rest of my list, but we'll have you back again.
I guess I got to be back.
You'll be back.
All right.
Yes,
that
we'll begin
fair.
making a habit of this again. Thanks very much for being here.
Always
it's
happy
always
to
a pleasure.
Be with you, Cheryl.
And that's going to do it for us. I just want to give you one quick note. Now, during the month of November, I will be taking some time off. Tony Palmieri has graciously agreed to be here, and he'll be here in my stead. But if you've got questions for any of the guests, we'll be doing election analysis, and we'll be talking with folks from the school board. So if you've got questions on those issues, email them to me. I'll get them to Tony, and he'll be covering the show for me during the month of November. So anyway, thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you again. Until then, keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.